once again. This is I, Bpendragon, and you are watching another episode of Bpendragon Presents. Today is our first Fanfiction Friday. I love the sound of that, because you always allow for alliteration. Always. As I said last Monday, so beginning of the week, we are going to be continuing in Apotheosis, which would be for us Chapter 2. Right here, Chapter 2. The center cannot hold. Or at least that's where I believe we are supposed to be. Based on, I just went back and I watched Mega Episode 1 again, or watched the end of it, so I knew where we were. And as far as I can tell, it ended at their transportation to this world. Okay, here we go. Twilight, or not. Twilight was thoroughly lost, and not just geographically. She had no idea how they'd gotten where they were, or what Luna was talking about, but her mind was keen and she was already chewing on the problem. She squinted at the sun's position in the sky and looked around. Alright, the change of the sun's angle puts us about 200 miles east and 1,000 south. Wait, what? That puts us... The unicorn frowned. That's not right. That's the middle of the ocean. I would agree if I knew equestrian geography. She turned to Luna, the unicorn already starting to sweat under the relentless glare of the daylight desert, and was shocked to see her companion crumpled on the stone. Princess! Twilight rushed to Luna's side, stopping when she saw tears streaming from the alicorn's closed eyes. What's wrong? I have to say, I am really happy that alicorn is now canon. I am insanely happy, actually. What's wrong? Luna's voice held such sharp bitterness that Twilight took an involuntary step back. Only that I am exiled again. That it wasn't enough that my power be shattered, that my very purpose be ripped from me, that I am found wanting no matter how hard I try. Her voice had thickened, taking on a lilt from the ancient past. That, after all this time, they only want me to be gone? The last three words came out in a deeper register than Luna's normal voice, something different than her magically augmented royal speech, turning the air between them brittle. Twilight knew that voice all too well, but she never expected to hear it from Luna's muzzle. There was a moment of silence, and the quiet only made deeper by the distant susurration of the sand. I love saying words like that, susurration. I don't know exactly what it means, but I'm going to guess that it means something along the lines of how the sand runs here. F11. Let's find out together. It's been so long since I read this. Since I read this fic. It's sad. Susurration. A whispering sound, a murmur. Okay, makes sense. You saw nothing. Nothing at all. There we are. The moment of silence, the quiet made only deeper by the distant susurration of sand. Actually, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, but I'm saying it like that. I didn't even look, I just looked at the definition. Luna? The unicorn asked, at last, hesitantly. There was another longer pause, and the alicorn heaved a sigh. Yes, I am. Princess got to her feet again, though that doesn't seem to help much. I'm sure it's not as bad as you think, Twilight said with a forced cheer, already sweating uncomfortably under the merciless sun. It must have been an accident. I mean, you said it was reacting to me, so it's probably my fault. She gave a nervous laugh. And you're the goddess of the moon, so can't you just goddess us back, right? No. What? Twilight blinked at Luna. I can't, Luna said quietly, looking away from the unicorn, her ears folded back against her head. All of me that was the goddess was bound up in Nightmare Moon, and now she's gone. That is too. I'm just a unicorn with wings. Twilight stared. The ground seemed to shift under her hooves. Well, you're in the desert. Of course it's going to shift under your hooves. Or feet. Or whatever. As if the revelation had physical force, knocking her back a step. But you... Then I... Her words came out less than coherent as her mind balked at all the implications carried by the simple statement. She threw her hooves around the princess. "I'm so sorry." Luna stood still, rigid with surprise, until Twilight let her go and stepped back awkwardly. Said the unicorn with a slight flush. "I mean, I don't know." "No," Luna interrupted her. "You were right. Night by moon would have destroyed everything." The alicorn turned away, looking over the blinding white dunes. "You should leave. This isn't your place." "Leave?" Twilight laughed hysterically, waving a foreleg around the endless waste around them. "What, and go where? We're in the middle of the desert, and it's so hot I can't even think. Hang on." She frowned briefly, her horn glowing, and a saddle-borne parasol popped into existence both on her back and on Luna's. "There, that's better." The alicorn looked startled. What are you doing?" "Luna." "Luna," Twilight said earnestly. "You're wrong. It's not true that ponies don't want you. I'm not sure what happened to bring us here, but we've got to get out, and I'm not leaving you behind." Twilight's now got a weird semi-British accent. "I don't know what happened." And this is why I'm not a voice actor. "Celestia said to take care of you." She what?" Luna had the same absent, bemused tone that Twilight had stammered in earlier, as if it were her world that was being cracked. "Come on, princess." Twilight stepped down the worn steps of the stone dais, prodding at the sand with a hoof. "We need to get moving and find water and shelter. Could you fly up there and see if there's anything nearby?" For a few long moments, Luna looked uncertain, then slowly shook her head. "Twilight, I'm not—" She interrupted herself with a squeal as Twilight's horn glowed, launching the alicorn high into the air. The unicorn felt mortified. "Dude, what? You just mortified. I don't think mortified counts. 3 hours dungeon! And then some! 1,000 years dungeon! You just threw Princess Luna of Equestria, Keeper of the Dreams, whatever else it was that I said in my caption last video, into the sky, and you expect to live to tell the tale. Twilight, you funny. You a funny girl." Oh, okay, sorry. Mortified to mishandle the princess in such a way, but it was far too hot to stand around arguing with her, especially since she had to be wrong. Well, she didn't have to be, but okay. "Well," she called up, but Luna glared down at her. "Don't ever do that to me again." "Do you see anything from up there, though?" Luna sighed and stretched her wings, the parasol popping off and fluttering downward before dissolving in a fizzle of purple as the magic construction returned its power to the unicorn. Twilight winced slightly. They'd have to rely on the contents of her saddlebags from what she could make with her magic. No food or drink made with magic would be nourishing, and trying to make too much from nothing would be tiring. With any luck, Luna would be able to spot some sort of landmark from up there. I like this view on magic. Follows the general view put forward in Artemis Fowl, as far as I can tell. Magic is another form of energy. It can be neither created nor destroyed. It follows the laws of thermodynamics. So to create matter from nothing, you need to use an insane amount of personal energy. It's also, coincidentally, the basic how the quote-unquote, I call it quote-unquote magic of the Simon Bloom universe works, even though that it's hand-waved as science being science. But come on, you're controlling gravity. That's magica. Magica. She watched the dark speck of the alicorn spiral overhead and hoped. At length, Luna dropped back down to the ground, looking somewhat wilted. There's a dark smudge over there, but it's miles away. Might be able to fly there if it weren't for this heat. And you'd never make it walking. Then we won't walk. Or fly. Exactly what direction is it in? Oh, yay. Teleportation! Luna looked at her, clearly questioning her sanity, but pointed with a hoof. There. All right, hang on. Twilight's horn glowed as she concentrated, enveloping the two of them in a sphere of violet light. A line of light shot forth from it, vanishing over the horizon, and there was a sudden staccato booming. The sound shifted past them in fits and starts, an inconstant strobe as the white dunes reflected the sun. Twilight squinted ahead of her, sweating as she concentrated hard on the teleports. Sand flowed like water under her hooves, and she had to fight to maintain her balance on the constantly shifting ground. She couldn't spare a look for Luna, having to focus all her attention forward, but she caught glimpses of a dark coat out of the corner of her vision, and knew that the princess was at least being drawn along. It was impossible to tell how long the journey lasted. It wasn't long, but the constant ebb and flow of magic and the rapidly shifting surroundings destroyed all sense of time and distance. And it did again. I'm gonna have to talk to Microsoft. I'm gonna have to email Microsoft tech support on that. It popped up a message. Oh, you can only record for 10 minutes at a time. You need to buy the full version. I have the full version. Here, let me show you. Actually, I won't. I'll throw it as a screen cap at the end after this is done. But I have the full version. Okay. Where were we? Destroyed all sense of time and distance. All Twilight knew was that it felt like wading through hock-deep mud, and the crushing, merciless heat battering down past the parasol didn't help either. The air seared her lungs as she panted. She merely missed the moment that the looming Tor came into view. The vast amount of blood-red rocks sprouted suddenly from the monochrome surroundings, an incongruous presence in the desert. A few more seconds and a series of pops followed, and Twilight barely stopped before smashing them into the steep crimson slopes. Her vision swam as she looked at the stone, and beside her Luna groaned wretchedly and spat bile. "Don't," she said weakly, "ever do that again." Wow, Twilight, that's 2 strikes. 3 and you're out. Forget 1,000 Years Dungeon. Try 1,000 Years Sun. Or Moon, wherever Luna banishes people to. Yeah, Twilight replied, her voice coming out faint and far and away, even to herself. I don't think that's going to be a problem. The world tilted oddly, and she found herself flat on her back. For a moment it felt nice to lie down, but then the heat of the white sand penetrated her coat, and she shot upright again. Yow! I guess, ouch! Luna snorted and began walking along the perimeter of the rise, toward where a thin sliver of shadow cast a dark patch on the sand. Luna trotted to keep up, fine grains spraying behind her as she matched pace with the larger pony, and sighed with relief as the sun's glare finally vanished behind the mass of solid stone. Do you know where we are? I've been trying to figure it out, but it doesn't match any map I know of. Yellowcorn didn't reply, and Luna looked over at her. Prince Luna? Luna? My princess, help! Help, Luna, help! The darker pony whirled abruptly, tears standing in her eyes. I don't care! Don't you understand? It doesn't matter. I love how my Luna here and my Luna over in Dead Seas are so... not Dead Seas, but Storm Riders are so different. My Storm Rider's Luna is very extremely posh, and after a few lines, becomes a little bit more feminine as she goes. A little bit more. Here, she's a bit more gruff and a whole lot manlier. No, this is Scar. Kind of a Scottish brogue type thing. He's Sean Connery. Totally. Where were we? Oh yes. It doesn't matter. Twilight took a step back. What's wrong, princess? You weren't like this before, and you know we weren't abandoned here on purpose. I was acting before. If I looked the slightest bit upset, ponies would avoid me and whisper behind my back. Now there aren't any others, except you. Luna blinked tears from her eyes, the wetness vanishing instantly on the parched sand below. I'm stuck with the pony that destroyed me. You, she sputtered wordlessly. I hate you! But I love you, princess. Princess need a hug? I'll give Princess a hug. The princess turned and fled, showering Twilight in grains of hot quartzite. Twilight watched her go, feeling like her stomach had stretched out and dropped and fallen clear through the sand. Being stranded in the desert was bad enough, but it hadn't hit her like Luna's words. It was only now, as she watched the princess vanish behind a crag of rock, that she felt truly lost. "What do I do now?" she asked plaintively of the empty air. It was too light, it was too bright, it was too hot. At least in the shade, the sand no longer scorched her hooves, but the unending white sparkled with a dazzling brightness that forced her to squint. It was a miserable place, as she could remember, and Luna had a long memory. Oh, I thought this was Twilight's view. My bad. Miserable place, and Luna had a long memory. The last tattered fragment of her godhead did little to soothe her parched throat, but she gathered them about her anyway, fragments of her godhead. The hollow feeling was a welcome companion, something to be embraced for its familiarity. She was by now used to being alone, even if not stranded in a desert beneath an empty blue sky. And yet there was something odd about it, something that rattled around in the back of her mind. Luna followed the line of rock until what was bothering her decided to present itself. The sand crunched under her hooves as the shadow cast by the ruddy stone lengthened, and finally it edged around into view. It wasn't like Celestia. Luna knew her sister, and knew she would do anything to safeguard Equestria, but she was far from cruel, and Twilight's presence in this exile was unexplainable. And she thought, stumbling over a rock camouflaged under a thin layer of sand, this place was too harsh. At least you have air now, and you only have to worry about extreme heat, not extreme heat and extreme cold. I mean, you'll get cold at night in the desert, but it won't be negative 300 Celsius or whatever. That's impossible. But it won't be negative really large number like it was on the surface of the moon. Negative 300 Celsius. And you have a degree in physics, Bpendragon. What is wrong with you? 273.15. I love that number. But no, the moon gets really cold, so. But, I mean, there's a difference between 25 degrees Fahrenheit so like negative 5, 10 degrees Celsius, and negative 100 of either. Once you get past negative 40, I mean, negative 40, they're equivalent, but once you get past that, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Digression complete. But the idea that this was some other accident, that the universe had cast her out again by blind chance, was such a bitter dose that she couldn't accept it. Scar's last look did nothing to help the proposition. She knew he had to be involved, but the dragon hadn't seemed happy about it. Of course I'm not happy. I don't have all the gold in the world. Some of it's sitting there right on your sister's head. I'm not happy. I'm a hoarding dragon. Okay then, David. Bpendragon, whatever I call myself. Actually, there's enough Davids in the world that knowing that my first name is David means absolutely nothing to you. I could even tell you my last name and you'd be almost impossible to find me, because there's a senator or congressman of some sort. I don't know, but we share the name. We share name. Yep. As her mind mulled over the bleak possibilities, her hooves carried her up a narrow defile that wound around the rock face. With a start, Luna realized that she could sense darkness nearby, some tiny slice of the night, preserved against the uncaring light. She lifted her head, looking around, and picked her way up the side of the narrow gorge. Luna stepped into the cave with a sigh of relief. Here the air was cool and soothing, and her ears pricked as the faint burble of running water from somewhere came from the deeper reaches of the shelter. Gloom was no impediment for her vision, and she followed the sound until she could smell the sharp clean of spring water and damp moss. The fall of some hidden brook or distant artesian well issued forth from the side of the cave, frothing frothing briefly over a pebbled scape of moss-covered stone to land in a shallow pool. Luna bent gratefully to drink it, and the water was cold and sweet. The crawl of gray-green moss promised a more comfortable place for repose than the bare rock and sand, and the princess almost thought it was actually a nice little place. Sounds like a hobbit hole before a cleaning day. I like that plan. Guilt stopped her. She wasn't the only pony who was hot, parched, and tired. Somewhere in the desert, Twilight Sparkle was just as stranded as she was, and Luna had abandoned her. Even if she could find Twilight again, what could she possibly say? They hadn't exactly parted on the best of terms. "Good job, Luna," she muttered aloud, her voice echoing back from the walls of the cave, thin and thready. She dropped down on the moss with a sigh, scrubbing at her muzzle. Time slipped. Over the endless days, weeks, years, and centuries, she learned how to not pay attention and only dabble her hooves. She learned how to not to pay attention and only dabble her hooves in time's flow. Since her return, Tia had helped Senator, helped her plant all 4 legs in the current, but sometimes she found it passing her by. She became aware that night was falling. The Alicon shook her head, a gesture of half negation, half frustration, and rose to walk outside. The oppressive heat of day had turned into an equally bitter chill, blowing off the lifeless sounds. The blue was turning purple, and Luna shivered as she looked out over the desert. She might not be able to raise the moon any more, but she could at least watch. There was a soft tapping of hooves from behind her, and a thermal blanket draped itself over her. See? Not as bad as the moon. Twilight Sparkle thinks of everything. At least I assume it's Twilight. Yeah, I know it's Twilight. Forget this. Draped itself over her. She turned and stared as Twilight Sparkle stepped up to join her at the lip of the defile. The purple unicorn didn't seem any worse for the wear. She wasn't wearing a parasol any longer, and her saddlebags bulged despite their contents. Twilight's cold weather gear being spread out over Twilight and Luna. I don't understand," Luna said at last. "Oh, just a modification of the finder spell Rarity taught me," Twilight said happily, a flash of purple rippling over her horn. "Works for greenery, water, and apparently princesses." Then she sobered. "I know you don't like me, but until we get out of this, we'll have to stay together." I don't understand why you came back." "Oh, it was Twilight's turn for a surprise. I couldn't just leave you. I couldn't. Besides," now her expression took a glint, a sharp determination that Luna had seen through different eyes. "Celestia told me to take care of you. And you are her best student, Twilight. Don't you forget that." The Alicorn had to physically restrain herself from stepping away from Twilight. That was not a tone she cared to be on the wrong end of again. Silence lingered for a moment, and then Luna tentatively floated a reply. I didn't mean it." "What?" Twilight blinked at her. "I don't hate you." "Oh." There was another round of silence, and Luna sighed. I was Nightmare Moon. That was my choice. It was a bad choice, but it was still mine. And you saved me, so I owe you everything. But you also destroyed me, Twilight, shattered me. When I have nightmares, they're about you." "Oh." "Apparently it's cleaning day over in the bathrooms right across the hall from my dorm." "Yeah, it's Thursday. It's cleaning days." "Well, this is a Friday. It gets released on Friday. I record on Thursdays because I've only got one class on Thursdays. And I have to work on Friday evenings." Okay. Where were we? This time it was Twilight who looked away. The unicorn scuffed at the rock with a forehoof, embarrassed. "I'm not that bad a pony, I swear." She looked up again, her eyes wide and earnest. "Princess, I don't have anything against you. I'm just an ordinary unicorn. Even if we can't be friends, we could still get along until we get out of this." Luna shook her head slowly. "It's not something we can simply walk out of." "One does not simply walk out of the endless desert." Actually, they do, but spoilers! Okay, how many more references can I throw in here in the next 30 seconds? I'm not going to even try. Yes. She looked up again, her eyes wide and earnest. Princess, oh, there we are. Okay, yes. It's not something we can simply walk out of. We haven't just lost a path. We were sent here. By Scar, or Celestia, or something else. She guessed at the desolation. It's an oubliette. A place of forgetting? Twilight frowned. It's just a desert. It's nowhere. It's a very specific nowhere. Where we were when we arrived was built. Built in the middle of the desert. Luna looked up at the sky. We're stuck. Oh, I'm sure it's not that bad. Twilight's laugh was uncertain. Once the stars come out, we could figure out exactly where they are, and from there it shouldn't be any trouble trying to figure things out. The alicorn felt a smile form unbidden. If I know anything, I know the stars. That's the spirit! Twilight smiled back and turned to look at the horizon, from where the moon would be rising. The sky turned to match Twilight's coloration, and then Luna's, turning black at the far horizon for a moment before the silver coin of the moon rose above the dunes. Slowly it crept upward, and the two of them stared as the moon sailed, alone, through the dark vault overhead. Alone? Oh no. Okay, how are we doing for time? Okay, so I need to get to here, and we're here. I honestly don't do any pre-planning. That's part of what makes this so fun. I just do it. It may not be fun for you because it's like, wow, Bpendragon, you're so disorganized. For me, it's fun because I just get to be myself. I don't even go and I don't even write any jokes beforehand. I just go. My sky! Twilight heard Luna's voice come out pained and breathless, as if she'd been stabbed in the heart. Where is my sky? The unicorn didn't have an answer. She was staring upward at the traitorous sky, only now feeling cast adrift. I don't know it, Princess, she said at last. I don't see how it's possible. My sky, Luna repeated a third time, then bowed her head and sobbed. Twilight could only awkwardly pat her shoulder through the 2 layers of blanket and stare helplessly upward. It was a long night, but the princess finally cried herself out and slept just before dawn. In the silence there was something high and distant. There was a high and distant crooning as the white sand dunes sang into the wind. I kind of imagined it to be something like this. I can't do it today. Usually I can actually make the wind whistling across the sand dunes. There it is. Kinda, sorta. Yeah, a little bit. Probably a little bit too quiet to be picked up, but it's there. It was a strange, exotic sound, and it lulled her into a semi-slumber, where she rode the sound through a bleak and endless empty landscape. The half-dream ended when she abruptly realized she could hear words in that song. She bolted upright, blinking. Octopa nias, octopa kot loco toka ke. Oh no, nies. Okay. Octopa nies, octopa kot la tokes. Zata panties, zata pantot la la cotes. The voice was coming nearer, thin and dry, yet still tuneful. I apologize, I have no tune. Cradling each word of that unknown language, a claw scraped on a stone, and a reptilian figure hauled itself into view. It must have been bulky at some point, and bigger than a pony, but now the scarred hides clung loose on sinewy limbs, 6 of them, and the trail ended abruptly at half its natural length. Its scales were faded to burnt umber, and around the serpentine head was an incongruous white cloth covering its white eyes. Octopa nictla milit. Okay. Nictla miltis. Octopa nictla miltis. Incentio tlalotli. Incencio moluic. I'm going to assume it's based on the Mayan or Aztec language, which is kind of the pronunciation I went for. I'm sorry if it's not perfect. It sang, hauling itself the rest of the way out of the narrow gorge, and headed directly for the ponies. Twilight heard some pony scream, and only after it stopped did she realize it was her. Luna scrambled to her horse beside her, and the reptile halted. "Ai, kenen no timo uika?" "I'm sorry, I don't understand you," Twilight replied, trying to remember a translation spell. The effort proved unnecessary, as it gave a wheezy laugh and spoke in accented but understandable words. "Aye, my apologies. I get so few visitors." No, I don't want that accent. I've been using that accent a lot. Give me a sec. I'm trying to think of a good one that I can actually do. How about I just speak now? Aye, my apologies. I get so few visitors. He chuckled again, though she didn't know what was amusing about that. What brings you to bestow your presence on an old blind basilisk? I like that. Kind of snaky. Luna stepped in, preempting any reply Twilight might have made. "I am Princess Luna, and this is Twilight Sparkle," she told the reptile in a cool, clear voice. "And who might you be?" The basilisk bowed deeply, abasing itself before them. "Forgive me, for I am not supplied for royalty. What I have is, of course, yours. I am Tozomok." Okay, so I was right. It was kind of going for the Central American. "Your hospitality is appreciated, Tozomok, but we do not intend to stay long. I merely have some questions for you." Twilight stared at Luna as the Alicorn's voice slid into something resembling silk-clad steel. This wasn't the Luna who had been helplessly weeping a few hours ago, and the pony had to wonder how literally Luna had meant it when she said she'd been shattered. "What," Luna demanded, "happened to the stars?" I cannot tell you, O dread sovereign," the basilisk said sadly. "I have not seen the sky in a long, long time. I cannot remember what it looked like." That was frightening. The casual admission would have been sweeping destruction to Twilight's world, but the basilisk seemed more upset by his inability to correctly answer the question than his inability to see the sky. Twilight saw Luna's muzzle tighten, and the princess inclined her head with a tight nod, a useless gesture, but an instinctive one. "Very well," she said. Then I ask, where are we?" Tuzamok tilted his head. "Aye," he said in a slow, careful voice. "Then I dare ask, you have not come to pass judgment?" "Judgment?" Twilight blurted, unable to help it. Luna twitched, a movement half arrested, and the scaled head swiveled in the paler pony's direction. There was a shadow of something hungry in that motion, and despite the fact that Tuzamok was pressed flat against the ground, Twilight took a step back. "I obey," the basilisk sighed in a voice like the wind rustling dead leaves. "The honest of justice gladly, even happily, but an old blind basilisk can hope, ever hope for mercy." "Oh, what are you talking about?" Twilight stared at the reptile as the first hot breath of wind came in from the rising sun. "Twilight, you don't just ask people why they're blind basilisks." "Karen!" "Yes." "Twilight," Luna said quietly. The unicorn looked over at her, and Luna shook her head. "Let me." It was almost pleading. Twilight put her hoof to her muzzle and gestured for Luna to go ahead. "Tuzamok," Luna said, "where are we?" "My desert," he replied with inexpressible weariness, "from where I walked long ago, and turned people and cities and fields and forests to sand and dust. The dust has long since blown away, but the sand remains." Twilight Sparkle gasped. The princess closed her eyes briefly, giving a convulsive shiver before she addressed the basilisk again. "Then, Tuzamok, tell me how we can leave your desert." "Aye, I can lead the way, if you would grant me but one moment to drink and regain my strength." "Of course." Luna stepped aside, and the basilisk lumbered toward the cave. As she passed, Twilight could hear his bones creak. Once he passed inside, the smaller pony turned to stare at Luna. But he's a murderer! He admitted it!" Twilight didn't understand what Luna was doing at all. All she wanted to do was get as far away from Tuzumok as possible. Like they could have been me, Luna said in a trembling voice. She dropped her head, looking as frightened as Twilight had ever seen. All in a flash, Twilight understood. Understood the bright mirror that the basilisk held for Luna, and the ultimate end of Nightmare Moon's eternal darkness, and eternity alone in a dark desolation created by her own hooves. But it's not, Princess. Twilight took a step closer. You could never be like that. Then you don't know me. Luna's eyes flashed as she took a breath. I wanted to, Twilight. I wanted so badly just to crush everything. I think we all have days like that, Twilight said with a nervous giggle. The sad princess was bad enough, but this Luna frightened her badly. Even if she understood, at least in part, where Luna was coming from, it didn't help her with how to react to it. There was no book she could consult, and magic was useless in this. She chose her words carefully. We all get angry, Princess. We'll all make mistakes. I'm guessing it's supposed to be we'll all make mistakes and say things we don't mean. But that doesn't make you a bad pony, and I don't think you're a monster. Like him. Sheesh, Twilight. Way to pass judgment on another species. That species. Maybe not. Luna took a deep breath and lifted her head back up, looking at her Twilight. I don't think he's a monster anymore either, she said at last. You heard him speak. It's possible, Twilight said grudgingly, and a basilisk's power is in his eyes, so I guess he's not really a threat. But still, he creeps me out. You gave him a second chance, Luna argued. Why not him? Twilight blinked and turned to look out over the desert. The sun reflected off the red stone, staining the white sand bloody crimson. She waved a hoof at it. This is why. You've never done anything like this. Luna followed her look, and straightened up, seeming somehow reassured. You're right, she said, her voice regaining some strength. I just feel a kinship to him. One monster to another. You're not, Twilight insisted. You're Princess Luna. Luna? The edges of the alicorn's muzzle curled upward in a small smile, and the scrape of claw and stone came from behind them. They turned to see Tuzumok emerge from the cave, laden with stone jugs that sloshed as he moved. Hurrah, he said, bed bowed. On your order, I will lead you to the edge of the desert, great ladies. Lead the way, Tuzumok, said the Princess Luna. The Princess Luna. They straggled back down the rock face, onto sand that was already starting to warm. Twilight made her parasols, shading both herself and Luna from the rising heat, and looked forward to her guide. She would rather not have to talk to him much, but she couldn't be rude. Would you like an umbrella, Tuzumok? The basilisk sighed with his deadly laugh. Aye, the lady's too kind to a condemned criminal. Too kind. My thanks. But the sun and I have reached an understanding. It shines, and I am hot. Without that, I would not know day from night. Right. Luna shared a glance with Luna, and then opened her saddlebags, horn glowing as she lifted out some plump, orange-striped fruits. She passed one across to the princess, who took it as they trekked across the trackless sands. I could not accept, the basilisk began, but Luna cut in. You won't be able to show us yourself across the desert if you collapse from Tonga, Tuzumok. Do I have to make that an order? The reptile replied with a laugh. That is not necessary, O princess. Your point is taken. He came to a halt, that turned, and Twilight floated yet another fruit over to touch his paw. The reptile plucked it from the air, and the unicorn winced as something buzzed oddly where his flesh touched her magic. My deepest thanks. He turned and started off ahead, moving on 5 legs through the sand. They started off again, the 2 ponies stepping in the broad, shapeless footprints of the basilisk. That odd reaction to my magic, Twilight ventured hesitantly. Tuzumok still disturbed her, but curiosity was a strong force. Do you know what that was? Aye, part of my sentence, I believe. Sentence? Judgment? Criminal? What court sentenced you? Luna asked, finally putting words to questions that had been rattling around in the back of Twilight's mind. The highest court, O great lady, the gods themselves, great mover of the sun, sentenced me, broke my power, and bound me here. Twilight gaped. He could only be describing one pony, but Celestia had never mentioned anything like this in her stories. Beside her, she heard Luna's intake of breath, but the princess's tone remained cool and even. Bound you here? Why? What was your sentence? To understand, the basilisk sighed. That was all she said. 1 second. And we're back. I can't do much because I'm just a freshman, but I'm recording. I don't need random rap popping out of nowhere. But it's still possibly happening. It's still possibly going to happen. Where were we? Yes. Typical, Luna muttered. Just typical of her. Ra, forgive me, third sovereign, the basilisk ventured in its dry voice. But do you know the goddess of the sun? Of course, Luna replied absently. I'm her sister. The procession stopped. The large reptile flung himself flat on the sand, covering his muzzle with his forepaws. Oh, forgive me, O great goddess of the moon. I did not know. Rise, Tuzamok. You have done nothing that I could find fault with. Even if Luna felt some sort of kinship with the basilisk, Twilight thought, she was remaining distant enough. She was suddenly intensely glad that the princess never talked to her that way, disturbing though Luna's confessions could be. My goddess is most kind, the reptile muttered, rising to his feet, but still keeping his head bowed. Most kind. I'm just me, Luna shook her head. Tuzamok, I am merely passing through. Please, let us continue. Of course, my goddess. The reptile raised his head up to the sun, then turned and began to head back over the dunes. On the downslope, Twilight had to step around a smooth spike of ruddy stone peering out of the drifts. It wasn't until the crest of the next dune that she saw it was far from a singular outcrop. Red rock pillars stretched out in a vast field before them, some almost entirely buried in the sand, some standing tall above. For a moment the unicorn thought they were a natural formation, but then she saw they were covered in symbols and rough striations, where something had hewn them from the living earth. What is all this? Twilight blurted, forgetting for a moment that the basilisk couldn't see what she was referring to. He knew anyway. Aye, the rustling of dead leaves. It is my remembrance. I think that you should tell me what you've been doing in this desert all this time. Hurrah! The basilisk's wordless expression seemed entirely inadequate to the task of explaining the endless expanse of curved monuments. Well, it's not endless. They just walked in from one border. So there's at least one border. And if there's one border, there's gotta be other borders? Not actually, no. That's like walking into the positive half of the Cartesian plane. Positive X or Y, your choice. You hit that point, but it goes on for both infinity on all sides and in front of you. Sorry, I digress. Okay. The reptile stopped briefly by one of the standing stones, reaching out until his paw encountered the surface. Twilight swallowed as she saw his claws match perfectly with the marks scoring the surface. In the beginning, I was very angry. I raged from one end of the desert to the other, but one cannot hinder sand. The basilisk began moving, but slower, as if the memories were a physical weight upon his back. The ponies watched him somberly from underneath the shade of their parasols. It was a long time ago. A long, long time alone. There was nothing to do but think. When the anger burned itself out, there was something else waiting to fill that void. Shame? Remorse? I do not know. It took me far too long, but at last I realized how much I had destroyed, and how I could never, ever undo what I had done. I began to carve out what I had remembered. Each person, each place, each name. So are there people in this universe? I mean, you say person, not pony. So are there people in this universe? Or is it, as it implies, a multiverse? And Luna and Celestia are just from the Luna, Celestia, and Twilight well, Twilight specifically is from the pony portion, and then Celestia and Luna reside in the pony portion. That's cool. Each place, each name, everything. In the beginning, it was so others could know. But now, he stopped at another stele, reaching up to run his long claws over the writing on its face. Twilight wondered how many times he must have made this journey to know everything so well, even when blind. I no longer recall most of this, and there is so much I have forgotten, so much that I do not record, so much that is gone forever. The shadows of the monuments painted stripes across the sand, growing shorter as the sun rose and heat washed over them. They seemed taller than the bright morning sun, their color more intense, like freshly shed blood. They remind me now why I am here, why I cannot leave this desert, what I have done and what I must remember. Silence reigned after that. They walked onward, Twilight keeping her brow wet with the water Tuzumok carried. Luna didn't seem to be as affected by the heat as she, but they were both sweating under the gaze of the sun. The rows of monoliths went on, hour after hour and mile after mile. By the time Luna called a halt at midday, Twilight found tears running from her eyes. Luna didn't know what she was crying. She didn't know what she was crying for Tuzumok's victims, somewhere in the sand beneath her hooves, for the Basilos himself, for the endless weight of grief and guilt and responsibility he carried, or maybe both, combined to create some enormous well of tragedy. She jumped as a hoof touched her shoulder and looked over at Luna. "I understand," the princess told her softly. "What?" She blinked, her vision clear. "The weight, the expanse of time and experience that mortals have, good or bad or even indifferent. It hurts, but I admit it is not often spread out like this." She looked around them at the pillars rising from the sand. Twilight nodded, squinting up at the sun, and her horn glowed as she brought a shelter into existence for them. The blankets were spread to protect them from the still hot sand. They had a small luncheon in the middle of the desert. It was not a joyful picnic, not with the incarnated memories of a dead land stretching to the horizon, but it was better than trying to march than the stifling heat. Tuzumok seemed content to simply wait in the silence a short distance from the impromptu pavilion, describing symbols in the sand with his claw, then wiping them away and starting over. "How do you deal with it?" the unicorn asked eventually. "I mean, it never seems to bother Princess Celestia." "Tia, I think, is the best of us," Luna said distantly, and without even a hint of her bitterness. "I don't know how she does it. Myself, I don't remember so much. Not since I came back. Just fragments, here and there." "Right," Twilight said awkwardly. Then every other statement from Luna seemed to hold a reference to the events surrounding Nightmare Moon, and she felt more guilty each time it was brought up. The fact that Luna agreed that what she'd done was right only made it worse. A few other desultory attempts at the conversation fell flat, trailing off into vagueness, and before and after a while Twilight left the princess alone to whatever thoughts had her so occupied. All the shadows but the one under their awning vanished as the sun reached midday, then beginning to reach in the other direction. "Maybe we should get going again," Twilight suggested at last, and Luna blinked, then nodded. "Yes, we should. Tuzumok, lead on." "Aye, as you command, great goddess." The reptile's bulk shifted as he got to his feet. Half of the water jugs he'd been hauling emptied between the three of them. They started off again through among the standing stones, walking among the sentinels of a dead land. The air rippled with the heat, turning even the nearest dunes into dreamlike mirages. The ground nearly scorched Twilight's hooves, and she breathed shallowly through her nose, nostrils dry and sore, sweating and wondering if they shouldn't have waited until night to travel. Surely the cold had been easier to deal with than the heat. But as the sun sank down towards the west, the green glimmered on the horizon, a break from the unrelieved red and white of Tuzumok's desert. Twilight squinted at the shimmering color. "Is that the edge of the desert?" She immediately snorted as she realized she'd again asked someone who was blind about something she could only see. Though the
Again, though, the bossless knew what she was talking about. Hurrah! Only a few hundred more steps until the sailing's end. Not long, said Luna quietly, and Twilight had to fight the urge to dash toward their destination. It was still only a blurred promise, hovering tantalizing over the edge of the vision. Again, just a sec. And back. Where were we? Not long, Luna said quietly, and Luna had to fight the urge to dash forward toward their destination. It was still only a blurred promise, hovering tantalizing at the edge of the vision. Yet step by step it came nearer, revolving not into scrub or grassland, but a lush forest with an unnaturally sharp edge. When they drew close enough to distinguish individual blades of grass, Twilight did run ahead, leaping over the interface between sand and earth and landing in the cool grass. The unicorn gave a long sigh of relief. The climate under the tall, spreading trees, instantly more pleasant. It's like Minecraft. You have no transition between biomes. You're just in different biomes, including desert to tundra, which I've seen before. The other two followed not long after, but while Luna stepped onto the grass, Tuzumok stopped short. "Aye, this is where we part." The bossless gave his rustling sigh. "I cannot leave the desert. Good journeying to you, O great ladies." Luna's head rose, her voice no longer distant. "Wait, Tuzumok!" The bossless stilled, his head cocked slightly to one side, waiting. "You have been here for so long. You have learned what is right and what is wrong. You have done everything in your power to address your debt, and you have admitted that you could never fully repay it. I think that you have reached the understanding to my sister sentenced you to." Tuzumok pressed himself flat against the ground. "You are merciful, O great goddess," he whispered. "You're letting him go?" The unicorn stared at Luna. "I'm ending his sentence," the princess replied softly. "It's not the same thing." "What do you mean?" Twilight blinked, looking from a alicorn to basilisk. "Dust," Tuzumok whispered, "and sand. I have been here far longer than any mortal should." So he, Luna bowed her head, a brief glow of dark purple lighting her horn. "Tuzumok," she said, "you're free." A spark kindled between the basilisk's eyes, a glow that spread to suffuse his entire body in a single blink. He raised his head as if he could actually see them, and his muzzle curled upward in a smile before his body crumbled into a pile of white sand. A dark plume rose into the air, hovering only briefly before blowing away in the wind. And this has been Chapter 2 of Apotheosis, which, if I remember correctly, is not all that long chapter-wise. I guess it's got more than 8 chapters. But it was one of those, whoa, I think I've been recording for 40 minutes now. Which, interesting is, after my first 10-minute recording, the program lets me go longer. I don't know. I don't get it. So maybe next time I'll just let it run for 10 minutes. Probably what I'll do for Monday is I'll just let it run for 10 minutes. Just throw out that recording and then just use whatever section it is behind that. Minecraft is probably going to be much shorter episodes. Minecraft Mondays are probably going to be shorter episodes because each frame is a key frame because of the change, whereas this one, things aren't changing for sometimes minutes at a time, so it's a smaller upload file, but I don't want to waste all the bandwidth. So, this has been another episode of Bpendragon Presents, and this is Bpen wishing you happy fic.